All right, so welcome to Taking Notes for Lectures. And again, I want to encourage you to definitely take notes for the diagnostic test lecture before you watch this video because you will learn a lot more if you do that. Again, imagine watching a news story about something you know nothing about. And then imagine watching a news story about your hometown, which you know a lot about. Which news story are you going to know more about, ask more questions about, talk to your friends about later? The one about your hometown. So get familiar with this. Actually practice this in the diagnostic test and then come back and watch this video. But if you did that already, great. Let's get into it right now and talk about taking notes for lectures. Okay, so this is going to be the last video about note taking. We're getting to the end. You're really close, guys. You've made it a long way. So just stick with me a little bit more, and we're going to talk about taking notes for the lectures. And a lot of this will be similar to what I just said about the conversations, but I want to show you an example. Definitely do the diagnostic test listening section if you haven't done so already. Take notes and then come back and compare your notes to what I wrote. Okay, so again, your mission is to identify the main idea. But if you remember, you don't have to write down the main idea, right? We're going to talk about could, should, and must again here as these three levels of things that you should write down in your notes. But again, your goal is always to be able to explain this passage to a 10-year-old. And you have to identify the main idea and you have to explain it to a 10-year-old. Now, again, you don't have to do this on the test. This is just for you practicing on your own to help you get better at your listening and reading skills. That's all this is for. They're never going to ask you this on the test. They're never going to ask you to explain something to a 10-year-old. This is just to help you become a better listener and better reader. So when you hear a lecture, it's going to be a professor and he's going to be talking about some academic topic. You don't know what it's going to be about, and you have to listen, take notes, and then answer questions about it. It should be about 4 or 5 minutes. Here are some questions to help guide your thinking, to help you kind of think about what is the most important information and what should I write down. So why does the professor say this? So why does the professor say something? Why is the professor speaking about certain things? Why is this information important? Why do you think, what's the value of this information? Remember that it's a teacher trying to teach something. So think about the information, why they're saying it, and what's so valuable about it. How does the professor elaborate on the main idea? So if the professor is talking about Christmas in America, how does he or she talk about it more? Do they give examples of like practices, like there's Christmas trees and presents? Do they talk about the history, like it was, a holiday and that's Christian and now it's different? So how do they explain it? How do they elaborate on that main idea? And what does the professor want the students to know by the end? So again, what do you think is the main idea? Why is the professor talking about this? Why does the professor give the examples and illustrations that they do? What's the important information? What does the teacher want the student to learn? Okay, hope that makes sense. And that's your idea for summarizing too. So summarizing will help you answer some of these questions. So I've broken it down into could, should, and must again for lectures. What you must write down is first an important detail within the first minute and categories connected to the main idea. So let me explain these two in a little bit more detail. The first one, an important detail within the first minute, there's two reasons for this. One reason is because I want you to focus. I want you to really focus on what you're listening to. And one way to focus, to improve your focus, is to have a goal, right? To have some idea in mind what you want to do. That's why I ask you to summarize the passages, because I want you to have that goal in mind. So I want you to have this goal of finding an important detail because it'll really kind of focus you in on the first minute. Also, you might hear something important that it'll be hard to remember later because remember, these passages are about 4 or 5 minutes long of speaking. So by writing something down that's in the beginning, it'll help you remember it later. And the last thing is categories connected to the main idea. So the usual structure of these listening passages is that the professor will introduce some concept, like Christmas in America, and then they will talk about it with different categories. Let's say, for example, talk about the different religious practices, what Christians do for Christmas, for example. Or if they talk about the type of ceremonies that happen during Christmas, decorating the Christmas tree and gift giving. So those are categories connected to the main idea. So those are the things you want to write down. And it's similar to the should category, the 2 to 3 subtopics that elaborate on the main idea. That's pretty important to write down. So this should and must, I would say, is pretty closely connected. So try to write down in the should category these things, the type of class. So is it a business class, an economics class, a history class? They'll say it in the beginning. They'll say, now listen to part of a talk in a blah 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 class, in a history class, in an art history class, in a business marketing class, whatever it is. The 2 to 3 subtopics that elaborate on the main idea. So just like my Christmas example, that same idea. And 1 to 2 characteristics of each subtopic. So when the professor is talking about Christmas in America and talking about 2 rituals, gift giving and decorating a tree, the professor will say something like this. The professor will say, the first example of a ritual for Christmas is gift giving. This is how it usually works. On the morning of December 25th, the family goes downstairs to their Christmas tree. I guess this is my family. Goes to their Christmas tree, and then they will exchange gifts with each other and open them in front of each other. And they will comment on them and blah, blah, blah. Whatever they talk about. So that's a characteristic of that subtopic. So I would write down something like Christmas in America, main idea. The subtopic would be gift giving, and then the characteristic would be morning December 25th, family gives gifts. Okay, so those are pretty important to write down because those would be things that you'll probably be asked about, or at least you need to know to help you understand the main idea. And again, you could write down the main idea and the tone of voice in certain parts, but that's just could. And again, you should have a good idea of what the main idea is by the end of the lecture. All right, and these are my notes for the example from your diagnostic test about wind power, and it looks like a lot. Okay, I know it looks like a lot, but remember this is a 5-minute talk. Okay, so they talk for 5 minutes or 4 minutes, something like that, and so there's a lot of information. So I have about, let's see here, about 15 bullet points or so. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Yeah, so about 15, 16 bullet points. And, I just write down the most important information that I think I need to answer the questions. You don't have to write down this much. You could write down more if you want, but this is actually not a lot of notes, believe it or not. You'll notice a couple things too, is that I almost always begin my new lines with a dash. It just helps me for some reason organize things. I like using dashes. You don't have to do that, but I do. Also, you'll notice that I indent. I put so wind power, it needs turbines. So needs turbines is connected to wind power, so I indent it, right? They talk about benefits. I put 1 and 2 benefits, and so on. So you can look at this on your own. I know you probably can't read this very well, which is why I put the translation of this here. And so again, you should have taken notes as well and see, what matched up. What was the same? What was different? Did your notes help you? And decide what you can do in the future to take better notes to help you answer the questions. All right, but that's all I'm going to say about notes. Talked about them a lot. I'm sorry, last thing I'm going to say, do not blindly agree with me. Experiment and try a few things out on your own. So that's why I have you do the homework all the time. That's why I talk about, having an experience with this material, because I just know how important it is for you to not just listen to me talk, but for you to experience this on your own. I know it's 5 hours, you want to complete everything really quickly, but it'll stay in your mind so much longer if you just invest that little extra time of doing the homework and preparing before you listen. All right, so you finished up with note-taking. Congratulations, guys. I know it's not the most exciting thing in the world, but hopefully you learned a lot and you developed a lot of skills that you need to help you improve your TOEFL listening score. We have 2 lectures left, and in this next one, this is one of my favorite. It's kind of a quick tips lecture, which I show you some ways that you can improve your focus so you don't get distracted from the room and other distractions around you when you take the test. All right, I'll see you guys there.